I don't think people in DC get the economic impact that the power sports industry has. We're a $51 billion a year industry, and there's a dealership in almost every community out there. Certainly every congressional district has one. And the wide range of economic impact that we've got all the way throughout the build, all the way to the sale, and then the maintenance and things afterwards, huge. And they don't get it. And once you explain it to them, then they really start to get it.
Welcome to the One Gang Worldwide podcast, your ultimate ride into the world of motorcycles. Visit cyclesworldwide.com, where we offer a completely free marketplace for everything motorcycles. Join our One Gang community where you can connect, share info, and swap stories with riders from all over the world. Join for free at cyclesworldwide.com and be a part of the One Gang community right now.
Hey, what's up, One Gang? We got an amazing show for you today. We're sitting down with the man who's quietly shaping the future of power sports from the top down. He's not building bikes or running a dealership. He's fighting for all of us in rooms where the decisions are made. Scott Schloegel is the Senior Vice President of Government Relations for the Motorcycle Industry Council, the Motorcycle Safety Foundation, the Specialty Vehicle Institute of America, and the Recreational Off-Highway Vehicle Association. He spent his career walking the fine line between politics and passion, making sure the rider's voice is heard in the halls of Washington, the states, and beyond. Man, welcome to the show, Scott. Extremely excited to have you on, and can't wait to hear your journey.
Yeah, thanks, Serge. And looking forward to chatting with you and Ben for a little bit here.
Heck yeah, Scott. Thanks for joining us. We'll start out with the break the ice section with 10 rapid fire questions. So we'll start when you're ready.
Bring it, babe.
All right. First question. What was your first bike or the first ride that hooked you on motorcycles?
First bike was a Kawasaki 75, a little green dirt bike that smelled amazing when that exhaust would belch out of there.
Those two strokes.
I had that, and my brother had a Honda Trail 70 is what he had. And I always used to refer that as like the old guy bike at the time because it had the turn signals and stuff on it. Mine was a little speedy dirt bike. So great bike though. Fantastic. Loved it.
Those are fun bikes. Question 2 is favorite way to clear your head after a day of DC politics?
2 wheels, baby. 2 wheels. Get out there and take a ride. I ride my motorcycle to work almost every day, and that is my therapy to and from the office.
Awesome. All right, question 3. If you could have dinner with one person, dead or alive, who are you breaking bread with?
Good question. There's 2 people that come to mind immediately. One, Jesus, and I just don't know that get all the answers I would want on that one. But the other one, my mother, she passed away 20-some years ago.
Sorry, man.
And she probably would have the answers to whatever I'd be asking the other guys. So miss her dearly and would love to just kind of catch up with her and talk about our daughters and how things have gone and get an evaluation from her. So
That's killer.
That's special, man. We get it. All right, if you weren't working in government relations, what do you think you'd be doing?
this is going to sound stupid, but chemistry. I love chemistry. I would love to be in the chemistry world doing something. So it's about as far as you can get from motorcycles.
So you were one of the great ones in the science classes, huh, Matt?
I wasn't great, but it was good enough, and I enjoyed it. It was like a passion, something I really liked. So yeah.
I would have been sitting next to you in class, kind of peeking over during test time. It's good science for some reason.
All right, one habit or mindset that keeps you steady under pressure.
It's probably the fear of saying something stupid or the fear of doing something stupid. So when there's a lot of pressure on me, I kind of like to step back and just think a little bit about what I'm doing before I get into it. Doesn't work when I'm in the home, but it works in the professional environment for me pretty well.
Nice. That's fine.
Most underrated part of the power sports community that people in DC don't get.
I don't think people in DC get the economic impact that the power sports industry has. You know, we're a $51 billion a year industry, and there's a dealership in almost every community out there. Certainly every congressional district has one. And the wide range of economic impact that we've got all the way throughout the build, all the way to the sale, and then the maintenance and things afterwards, huge. And they don't get it. And once you explain it to them, then they really start to get it.
That's interesting. So best advice a mentor ever gave you?
Two things come to mind for me there. One, first one would be sat down with a guy who ran the congressman. I worked for a congressman in Michigan at the time, and I sat down with his state director just to kind of say, hey, how do you do things? What's your best advice? And he said, my first best advice is to pay yourself and put as much as you can into your 401k and pay yourself, live on 10 to 20% less than whatever your paycheck is, no matter how big or how small it is, because in the end, it'll pay off for you. And it's a marathon. And so that was probably the best advice I got, just kind of on the personal side. On the professional side, the best advice I got was always leave room to escalate. I tended to, when there was an issue that came up, kind of go in there and go right to, the 9 or 10 on things and let them know, the advice that I got was kind of take it incrementally, start out here and build your way up and then leave room to escalate, because most of the time you don't need to get to 10. You can get to 6 or 7 and you'll be fine.
Smart. Don't show all your cards and then you lose any ability to crank it up. Yeah. All right. One word that sums up the job of representing an entire industry.
Cat herder. I don't know if that's one word or two.
That's a great one.
It is herding cats. Yeah.
Cat herder. That reminds me of those old Will Ferrell Jeopardy skits on SNL. Like I could see the that catheter being the topic and Will Ferrell saying cat herder.
Exactly. Yeah, where he's doing the Sean Connery bit on there, right? Yeah.
I'll take swords for 1,000. All right. The rapist, that's therapists, you moron.
Right.
All right, and question 9, what's something people would be surprised to learn about you?
It used to be that I ride a motorcycle. Like, when I was working on the Hill and when I was working at the Export-Import Bank of the United States, everybody would be like, you ride a motorcycle? How is it that a guy who's, wearing a suit and tie is a passionate motorcycle guy? But these days it's probably that, I've been to 27 countries around the world as part of my work and really enjoyed that.
That's cool.
Bonus question. What does that look like when you're riding into work? You got just an outer shell on? How do you got your tie on already? How do you do that?
He's like James Bond, dude. Like when James Bond pulls in.
I'm in all the gear all the time, guys. So I'm always wearing my full face. I've always got the jacket on. Even in the hot and nasty weather that we get out here in DC area, I try to always gear up, wear the gloves and everything. Might have a suit and tie on underneath it at times, but these days, thankfully, that's one of the beauties of working for the industry is that I get to wear this stuff all the time and not wear the shirt and tie and cufflinks that you were wearing, when you were working for the Export-Import Bank of the United States and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's great. All right, last question. What musician or band are you cranking before going into meetings with the crazy politicians of DC?
So my youngest daughter did her undergraduate work at Virginia Tech.
Okay.
And Enter Sandman, if you've ever been to one of the Virginia Tech football games and they start just kind of cranking Enter Sandman, that I don't know how anybody can't get hyped up at that.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Fair. Good answer. You survived, man. You broke the ice.
All right.
You did
all right. Let's get into the fun part, man. Let's get into the early life and roots. Start from the beginning. Where'd you grow up and what kind of environment shaped you?
Yeah. So born down in the Chicago area, and my dad was at the time running the Stouffer's Top of the Rock, which is a restaurant on top of the Prudential building in downtown Chicago. And at one point, I think it was in 68, he said he was tired of riding around with a 3800 front seat of his car because he was doing the night shift. He was the night manager there. And he bought a restaurant up in the Upper Peninsula, or right on the Michigan-Wisconsin border of the Upper Peninsula. And we moved up there. So I was just a little kid at the time, my brother and I, and then they had 2 more kids up there. Grew up in really rural area. And this is the kind of thing where you remember back in the 70s and the early 80s in particular, almost every rural road had that single track that was going down on off of the gravel and everybody's yard had that line through it because we all had dirt bikes that we were riding at the time or bicycles that they would ride on that at the time. And so grew up in the restaurant business. I think that's really served me well because in the power sports business, when you're looking at like dealerships and stuff like that, it's not all that different. A lot of times your name is out there on the sign out front, and you learned a ton of hard work ethic, values, and just kind of an ability to serve people and understand what service actually means. So,
Yeah. What were you into sports, politics, anything like that growing up?
yeah, was not into politics at all. One of my younger brothers was born. My dad contracted polio. Back then, you took those sugar cubes, remember? And so he took one of the sugar cubes. It had too much of the live virus on it. He ended up contracting polio. So he
Ooh,
couldn't get out and play basketball or soccer or football with us and stuff like that. So what he could do is he could drag his leg over a three-wheeler or over a snowmobile or quads once those came
Nice.
out. And so a lot of what we did focused on the stuff that my dad could do. So it was like going out and hunting, going out and cutting trees. We would cut wood like all summer and then heat our house in the winter because he had four strapping young boys who could haul all that wood in. And I did play a little bit of some sports, started off with t-ball and did freshman football and stuff like that. But really it was more the other outdoor stuff, getting out in the woods. Yeah,
yeah. Yeah, who'da thunk silver lining to polio? That's wild.
exactly. Yeah.
Looking back now, do you see any moments from your youth that set you up for the world that you're in today? Maybe something about grit or discipline, perseverance, or communications?
Yeah, growing up in the restaurant business, our restaurants were called Schlegel's restaurants, right? We had two of them, and every plate that went out had our name on it. I remember working one day. I was a busboy. I was a younger, earlier on in my work life. And I was sitting there, I had one hand on the table and I was taking a glass off and putting it in a bucket and then taking a plate off and putting it in a bucket. Woman by the name of Jan Esch, who is, I think, since passed away, was a good friend of our family's. And she walked over and she said, that'd go a hell of a lot faster if you use two hands, Scott. And I looked at her and I was like, I'm the boss's kid, right? But that taught me that it doesn't matter who you are. You got to work your ass off no matter what. And I was being lazy. I was being slow. I was being inefficient. And that lesson, I mean, this goes back almost, 40 years for me. But that lesson has stuck with me the entire time because I was proud that she was able to come over and just give it to me because I deserved it. And B, it taught me that, no matter what you're doing, don't half-ass it. Don't use one hand on it. Go into everything with two hands.
That's great.
That's great. Yeah, that's a good story, man. So when you were coming through school, college, what path were you on? What were you studying? What was your major? And then after school, what was your first real work out of college?
Yeah. Went to a small university up in the Upper Peninsula, Michigan, in Marquette, Michigan. It's called Northern Michigan University. And went up there, followed a girlfriend up there, was just kind of interested in hanging out with her. She was a year older than me and she had been up there for the year. Studied business at first because I thought I really wanted to do business. That's what the family was. The family was business. Realized I wasn't really enjoying that. Loved my chemistry class, was thinking about doing the chemistry thing, but ended up doing communications, public relations type work. And I was getting ready to graduate from Northern when our local state representative, a guy by the name of Bart Stupak, was looking to fill a position because his staff person had just left. And he said to me, hey, would you be interested in coming down to Lansing, our capital in Michigan, and working down there? And I said, you're a Democrat. I'm really more of a Republican, but I'll give it a try type of thing. And because I am pretty middle of the road on almost all issues. So I went down to work for him. He decided to run for state senate, lost. And then I worked for a different state rep for 2 years before Bart decided to run for Congress. And then I went back to work for him in Congress. But yeah, really, I mean, I hadn't been in politics. Actually, between my junior and senior year of college, I came out to DC and I worked at a PR firm out here for the summer and loved it. And part of what we had to do was go up to the Capitol and do different meetings and things like that. And I saw these guys walking around with their badges on that could get in and out of the Capitol and just walk in and out whenever they wanted. And I thought, man, that's really cool. This is some cool stuff. And that's kind of when I got bit by the bug. So when Bart asked me to come work for him, I was like, oh yeah, I'll do that. So
amazing how everybody has this little small fork in the road, right? Where it kind of takes them completely
Yeah,
into a whole different path that they end up becoming and enjoying. So that's so awesome. Great story, man.
for sure.
Yeah. Getting into the Capitol Hill chapter a little bit, you spent years working in and around Congress. What was that like? The wins, the losses, and the human side of trying to get real things done.
That was back in the 90s. So it was a different world back then, right? So the guy that I worked for, he lived in a house that was 3 Democrats and 4 or 5 Republicans that all lived in this same house together. You can't find that out here today.
No,
There's no way you're going to
no.
find that
I
in
know
here
we're
today.
so separated, so
So,
stupid.
it was a get things done. You kind of had your disagreements and you would kind of beat each other up over certain issues, but then you'd go out and you'd have a beer that night. You would hang out and you'd have, a good time together. And it wasn't the same. It wasn't the polar kind of bitterness that you see today. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I also thought it was a respected profession back in the day. Maybe not as much today. Their approval ratings are below a used car salesman, I think, at this point. So, but I do think that I had great experiences. I learned a lot of stuff. I learned from some really smart people. I have had the pleasure of meeting presidents, ever since Bill Clinton all the way through, pretty much met everybody. Had times where my boss worked on the Oversight and Investigations Subcommittee in Energy and Commerce. So I did investigations of everything from cybersecurity leaks at our nuclear weapons labs to the investigation of the Deepwater Horizon disaster down in the Gulf of Mexico, where the BP platform blew up down there and leaked all over the place. It just some really cool stuff that I did while I was on the Hill, which then transitioned me into the administration. And I had awesome experiences there that I'd be happy to talk about if you want.
Yeah, for sure. I was kind of going to get into that a little bit now. I wanted to ask you, like, most of us only see and read what's on the news. How did you navigate in those earlier years before you got into these higher positions you're in now, but in those high stake rooms, kind of navigating through, but yet still being true to what you believed in? Because you get swayed a lot of times. How did you maintain that at that younger age that's kind of helped you now as you're in higher positions?
Yeah. So, I was fortunate at a younger age to be in leadership positions. So, when I first started working for the congressman, I was his state director. So I ran his 7 district offices that we had across the northern half of northern Michigan, the lower peninsula and all of the upper peninsula. So I was in a leadership position there. He had 3 different chiefs of staff in the first 4 years. And every time one would leave, he would ask me if I was interested in coming out to be the chief of staff. So I finally said yes. And my wife said, yeah, we don't have any kids yet. Let's go out and do it. And you'll be there for 2 years and you'll get fired. And then we'll figure out what we're going to do next, right? I stayed out there as a chief of staff for 14 years. So that was really kind of I was fortunate that I kind of came in at that upper level, but it was also a bit of an moment because I hadn't served in DC, right? I didn't know the DC stuff, but what I did know is I knew my congressman and I knew what he liked and what he wanted and his issues and his priorities. And so I just kind of stuck true to those. And then I learned from other people in the meetings that I was in. When you're sitting in a meeting with John Dingell, for example, who was a congressman from Michigan, he's the longest serving member ever to serve in the House of Representatives. And he's talking about, young man, we tried that back in 1967. And let me tell you how that turned out for us, type of thing. There's just a lot of wisdom that you get from these people who had been around for a long time. And one of the biggest lessons I learned at that point too was I remember sitting in a meeting that was with a guy who was chief of staff for another member of Congress. And I kept waiting for him to weigh in because he just sat there and he just listened and listened and listened. And finally somebody asked him what he thought. And it was such a well thought out package of information that he had just kind of mosaicked together from sitting there and listening that I looked at that and I thought, I don't do enough listening. I hear something and I want to weigh in right away on it versus sit back, absorb it, kind of process it. And that guy, Phil Schloegel, ended up becoming the director of White House Leg Affairs for, President Obama. And he really achieved great things in his career and did great things. But I learned that lesson from him of sitting back and kind of listening and waiting and then putting it all together.
It's amazing. Scott, let me ask you this, man. Before we get into you crossing into the power sports side, you mentioned something kind of interesting. You said that, the old timers when you were young would say to you these certain things and this wisdom that you would take in. I'm kind of going back to what I said as far as like, what we see, what the public sees on TV based on the politics side. Do you see the politicians still being like that? Were they helpful, or is it a hodgepodge in there where it's just chaos and what the media portrays to us?
That's a great question because the answer is yes, right? It's both.
Right.
So there are still some folks who are like that. There are still, and they're the people that I'm closest to, quite honestly, on the Hill. I think of somebody like a John Curtis, a senator from Utah, who was a longtime congressman from Utah, or many-term congressman, recently moved over to the Senate, Republican from out there, super thoughtful guy, super engaging, sits back, talks to you, has discussions with you, doesn't talk at you. A lot of members of Congress will talk at you because they know more than you do, type of thing, and they don't want to listen. He is somebody who is really thoughtful in the way that he approaches stuff and wants to listen. And so, those kind of thoughtful folks are in the minority, but there are a lot of the firebrands in particular who you tend to see on the news and who never met a camera that they didn't like, type of thing. And they tend to be pretty much what you see when they're on the air. At least that's my experience.
Yeah, I understand.
And then the folks who are kind of the journeymen behind the scenes who are getting stuff done and aren't seeking the limelight are really the ones who I think can get the most done out here.
Yeah, thank you for answering that. That's awesome to understand.
Public servant.
Yeah.
That concept is very loosely interpreted these days. So, crossing into motorsports, power sports, how did the opportunity with Motorcycle Industry Council first come about, and what made you say, yeah, this is what I want to do, this is where I want to make my mark?
Yeah. So after Congress had gone into the administration, President Obama appointed me to the Export-Import Bank of the United States. Wanted to go there because that was a very middle-of-the-road kind of agency, right? You were working with businesses nonstop. You were exporting U.S. goods and services around the world. And so you were really making an impact back here at home. Loved that job. Worked 7 years, I think it was, in his administration. Trump won. He came in. I was actually the acting vice chair and first vice president at the bank at the time. And then the acting president left during Trump's first year. I had elevated up to the acting president and chairman of the board during that time, and worked really well with the Trump appointees who had come over there. One of the guys who had come over, Jeff Getman, ended up being chief of staff for Governor Youngkin here in Virginia. He's now been nominated for the deputy U.S. trade representative in the current Trump administration. Great guy, super thoughtful guy. Don't always agree with each other on politics type of thing, but we listen to each other. Great to have a beer with type thing. And so that transition, I had done that for, I think, about 14 months in the Trump administration. At that point, I had had my 25 years and I could retire from federal government, decided to retire. But I had two girls who were in college at the time and was trying to figure out, do I want to go back into like full-time work or do I want to, kind of stay retired? This gig came open. I just happened to see it on LinkedIn. Kathy Van Cleek, who had the job before me, had been here for 42 or 43 years with the associations. Not a job that kind of came open very frequently, obviously. And when they interviewed me, they said, you're way overqualified for this gig. Why aren't you out, running something else or doing something? I said, I love motorcycles and I love politics. And so why not marry those two passions that I have of the power sports and politics? And so thankfully they hired me, and it's been a little over 7 years now doing this. Been through some crazy times already, during COVID and other stuff that we've done. So that's how I kind of got into it. I remember being out at the casino with my buddies on a Monday afternoon, and they're like, isn't this great? We could just kind of hang out and golf when we want and go to the casino or something like that when we want. And I said, It is, but there's this gig that came open with the motorcycle industry, and I would love to do it. And they're like, dude, that'd be perfect for you, right? So
Nice.
worked out, and it's really been a good relationship
Amazing
ever
timing.
since.
I mean, because you said it before that motorcycles have such a personal meaning to you and your family, you know, with your dad's polio and things of that nature, that
Yeah.
how it connected you guys, even got you guys closer. How has that shaped the way you fight for the industry nowadays?
I think it's super important to have somebody in this role who actually is a rider, you know, who actually does participate in power sports. You can
Absolutely.
get an idea of what the issues are. But when you're a rider, it kind of gives you street cred then, right? You know, especially when you're up working with the motorcycle caucus. So we've got a Senate motorcycle caucus and a House motorcycle caucus, where members of Congress who are passionate about motorcycles, whether it's because they ride or because they've got facilities in their district or whatever the case is, it's really important to kind of have that experience and that background of being a rider. And so I think it's been, you know, super helpful and super important to have that background in this role.
So
Definitely agree. Yeah, that's vital. All right, so now getting into your next chapter, I got to read this one so I don't mess up any of the acronyms. You're representing 4 major organizations. You're now leading government relations across the MIC, MSF, SVIA, and ROHVA, and even served as acting president and CEO for all of them. What does that responsibility really look like day to day? And what's that weight that comes with being the guy representing so many voices?
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'm the tip of the spear on that stuff, but we have an awesome team that I've got here, government relations team, who works their butts off and makes me look good every single day. And so, you know, while I am the senior vice president, I've got a really good team here that does fantastic work. It's a little bit like being the GM of a dealership or something, right? I mean, unless if you don't have good guys and gals who are working for you,
right.
you're going to look like crap. And so uh, they do a great work here for us. You're into so many different issues, Ben, as you're dealing with all 4 of those associations, right? So there's a lot of overlap amongst the companies that are members of those 4 trade associations. On the MSF side of it, the Motorcycle Safety Foundation, you know, we're in 46 states that our curricula are used in. All the federal government uses us. The military uses our MSF courses for training. So that's a really important and really challenging association in terms of kind of working it on the ground in states. It's more of state to state combat than it is on the federal level. For the other 3 trade associations, they're just absolutely state level things, but there's also kind of this umbrella of federal organization or federal regulations that you're dealing with that are really important. And so issue wise, you're doing on-road stuff, you're doing off-road stuff, you're doing motorcycle safety training stuff for both on-road and off-road. And the issues that we work on are, you know, I mean, it is everything from PFAS chemicals, perfluoral and polyfluoral alkyl substances, these chemicals that they're trying to ban that are in everything, right? They're in dental floss, they're in medication, they're in every gasket, they're in hoses and
Clothes.
valve stems and clothing. Yeah, sweat
Well,
wicking
why are they
technology.
trying to ban that?
They're forever chemicals, and so they last for a really long time. And if they get into your bloodstream, they can cause cancer.
And
But
they can
when
cross
you
the
look at
blood-brain
those
barrier.
PFAS chemicals, you've got polymerized PFAS, which are like, if you look at the top of my bottle here, a polymerized PFAS is something that's not going to get through your body cells and not going to enter into your bloodstream and stuff because they're so big, versus the PFAS chemicals that partition to water. They're smaller. They can actually get in, and they can then become cancerous and cause problems. And so
Look at
part
us
of what
talking about chemistry anyway.
I know, you see, it all goes back to your passion once again, man.
you make me nerd out on the PFAS chemical stuff, but
Yes.
That's
but
so
the elevator pitch on that is you've got the stuff that's bad that can get into water and get into your body easily. That's the partitions to water. And then you've got the polymerized stuff, which is the stuff that's in our products, right? Which takes a super long time to break down. And so what these governments, state governments, and in some instances, the federal government are trying to do is they're trying to ban those chemicals in all products. instead of looking at the stuff that really is the bad stuff first, which is the stuff that partitions to water, and then come later with the polymerized. So, it's PFAS chemicals, it's lane splitting, it's highway and road construction, it's EPA emissions, it's Federal Trade Commission, with dealing with dealerships and stuff like that. And then the regulations that they try to put on dealerships, it's EVs and EV charging infrastructure, it's motorcycle safety training, it's public lands access, it's recreational trails program to build and maintain trails around the country so we can ride our vehicles. So, I mean, it is the full gambit of issues.
And currently also tariffs too?
Tariffs are huge. So right now, tariffs and PFAS are probably the two biggest things that we're dealing with. And the tariff issue is one that is really taking a bite out of our industry.
Do you feel it's a long-term thing, or do you feel that it's just for a little bit, maybe like a year or so of suffering, and then things will work itself out? Or what's your gut on that? This is just off the cuff question.
Yeah. No, I hope it's not a long-term thing. If it is a long-term thing, our industry is in real trouble. And quite honestly, the country's in real trouble if it ends up being a long-term thing at the levels that are in place right now. We're recording this the week that, the day after the Supreme Court had their hearing on where they heard the case on the IEEPA tariffs, the emergency tariffs that the president's been using. And if the Supreme Court overturns that, then he'll look at other ways to do different tariffs, but they're nowhere near as severe. They're nowhere near as long as what the IEEPA process has been on tariffs. And so I think it'll be a shorter term thing, and I hope it'll be a shorter term thing. I also think that as the effects of tariffs get further baked into the economy, that the economy is going to continue to slow down. You're seeing consumer confidence that is way down right now. They just had the elections in Virginia and
New York,
and New Jersey, where when my buddy Jeff was running or working in leadership on Glenn Youngkin's campaign 4 years ago here in Virginia, he said, "You think we're going to win, Scott?" He's like, "It's a tough state." I'm like, "I think you're going to win." And I told him the percentage that he was going to win by. I was off by 0.1% as to what he won by. This time around, I thought that Abigail Spanberger, who was running the Democrat, I thought she would win and flipped it from Republican to Democrat, but I thought she'd win by about 8 points. She won by 15. So either I'm out of touch, I'm losing or there's a lot more undercurrent there than what those of people like myself who have done this for 35 years and think we know what we're doing know about. So I think it'll be shorter rather than longer for the tariffs.
Right, for sure.
What's up, One Gang? I used to think that if I spent big money on riding gear with a logo on the back, I was getting top quality. I gave Leather Up a shot. I wasn't sure at first, could I really get quality gear without spending a fortune? But after putting tens of thousands of miles on their jackets and vests, I had my answer. No busted zippers, no loose stitching, just solid, well-made gear that lasts. Leather Up carries trusted brands like Milwaukee Leather, Hot Leathers, and more, with gear for every rider and every budget. Plus, their customer service actually cares and picks up the phone, something rare these days. So do yourself a favor, check out leatherup.com. Whether you need jackets, vests, chaps, boots, helmets, or luggage, they've got you covered. And because you're part of the One Gang Worldwide family, use code CW20 at checkout for 20% off your entire order. Stop overpaying, gear up with Leather Up, and see the difference yourself.
I wanted to ask you a question. When you stepped into the leadership seat, you took somebody's spot that was there for 42 years, right? What were the biggest priorities that coming into somebody, it's not a revolving chair, so there was a lot of things in play already. What were some of your earlier priorities and things that surprised you, and what you felt that needed to be done at that moment in time to kind of move this thing forward and make it stronger?
Yeah, good question. Coming in, it's always easy when you come into a job to look at how things are being done and kind of say, okay, this is broken or that's broken, or this can be improved upon, and et cetera. And I think for any of us that are in a job for a long period of time, we kind of get used to doing things a certain way. when I came in, I had a couple of issues. One is I needed to learn their issues and kind of understand what the motorcycle issues were, because I had been doing something completely different before that. The second was when I looked at what the processes that they had in place here, there was very little automation that they were doing at the time. We put out scores of reports, right, to our membership. And a lot of these reports, they were sending a letter out to a government entity in a state, waiting for them to respond back. When they responded back, they would put it in. They literally, in some cases, cut and pasted things to kind of put some reports together. Multiple levels of viewing and touches that they had on these reports. And we were really pretty staff heavy at the time, and we could find some really good efficiencies by going in and looking at, what software is out there for us to improve, and how can we track our legislation better. I mean, when you're tracking hundreds of thousands of bills across the country and 50 states and the federal government, it's a huge task, and no one person can be doing that. And you really need to use automation. And so as we get into more AI related stuff, I found some efficiencies that we could do there. The staff here actually had recommendations too on, we've been doing it this way for a long time, but I think we could do it this way. Okay, let's give that a try. And so all of that has made us a leaner, more efficient operation that can respond a lot more quickly to our member companies.
Makes sense. All right, let's get into the mission of fighting for the industry. So you're out there on the front lines dealing with state and federal issues like PFAS, we mentioned, bans on gear, public land access, e-bike regulations, all those topics that you had mentioned. What are the biggest battles you're fighting right now for riders and for dealers?
So tariff is number one. PFAS chemicals are number two. There's another thing that's coming along, extended producer responsibility, EPR, they call it. A lot of states are looking at what happens when you ship a motorcycle or ship any product in, right? And the shipping materials, that stuff needs to be recycled. It needs to be coming, in some instances, you've got states like California where they're telling department stores that if they sell that Cycle World shirt that Serge has got on today, that when he's done with it, they need to take it back and dispose of it properly and recycle it or use it for something else. This is what the extended producer responsibility laws are. It's like the next wave of kind of really pain in the butt stuff that we're going to have to deal with. I think most dealers, they don't like to just throw stuff out. They don't like to, they probably are recycling the cardboard and the wood and things like that are coming in the crates. And I think by and large, we're all good actors already. We don't need that to be legislated upon us. And so those are kind of the fights that we're looking at right now is let's tell them about all the good things that we're already doing so that we don't get legislated on us.
Cracks me up, man. You got states like California, New York, and all these states that have so much wrong there. And these are the things that they break balls for. You know what I mean? It's just like, to me, it's just like if they would concentrate on making their states a little bit better in different venues instead of worrying about breaking down a t-shirt that they may not like the way the material is. It's just insanity. That's a conversation for another time. We will get into this. When you're sitting across the table from lawmakers who may not understand our world, what's your strategy for getting them to listen?
Bring it back to their home district. Talk about the number of jobs that we're supporting in their district. Talk about the number of dealers that we have in their district. Talk about the trails that we're building in their district. When you talk on the macro scale, it's easy for them to kind of dismiss things. But if you say, hey, Kim Harrison down here at Coleman Powersports, and she's got a couple of stores, let me tell you about all the great stuff that they're doing, at Coleman Powersports. Or pick your dealership, pick your manufacturing facility, pick your distribution site. I mean, there's the jobs. It always comes down to dollars, jobs, tax revenue that's generated both for the federal government and for the local, state and local governments. Because once they start looking at that stuff, they realize what an impact we have. One of the things that we did years ago was to, when I first got here, is what we started up the Outdoor Recreation Roundtable, which is a basically senior leadership from recreation, all different forms of recreation. So it can be the equestrians, the motorcycle guys, the ski people, the scuba people. We're all, the marine manufacturers, the RV dealers, we're all in the same room together and talking about what our issues are. But we got the Bureau of Labor Statistics to do a study, an annual study that looks at what's the economic impact of the outdoor recreation community as a whole. We're $1.2 trillion economic impact. That's more than mining, and we're right up there with like hospitals and other.
Wow.
Yeah, it's amazing the impact that we have. And then you go in, and so on the tariff issue, for example, I met recently with the two undersecretaries of Commerce who are responsible for recommending what tariffs they're going to put in place. And, they have to take your meeting because you're a $1.2 trillion association, right? That's real money. So, and they want to hear how they're impacting $1.2 trillion worth of the U.S. economy.
For sure.
So
I think
that's when you're meeting with local or, elected officials, that gets their attention.
I think the fear a lot of times for like enthusiasts and riders, right? Somebody who doesn't get a chance to understand what goes behind the scenes. I think a lot of the worry is like all they portray motorcycling is dangerous, right? So anytime you try to fight for motorcyclists, they go, it's dangerous. If less people are dying, then let's do what we got to do. So I think that's a worry from just being on the other side of the desk, not knowing what's inside. So truly appreciate you all kind of getting into the details of this thing.
I can't tell you how many times I've gone to the doctor or been at the hospital or something like that. And they say, what is your profession? And I tell them, and they're like, I've worked in the ER. I would never ride a motorcycle. And I'm
always.
I've been riding for 50 years, right? I got T-boned once by a guy. But other than that, and, being stupid once or twice where I might lay a bike down myself, thankfully, not on the roads.
Right.
If you're out there and you got your head on the swivel and you're paying attention and you
That's right.
take a class, you take some MSF courses and the extended courses, it can be as safe as just about anything else.
Agreed.
And the statistics are actually all really interesting and kind of revealing as well when you dive into those. It's so many different elements and aspects of, were you riding at night? Was it raining? All of these other things are not taken into account, and it just gets this blanket statement that it's dangerous.
Alcohol usually has a very large piece of that. So unfortunately, people sometimes buy motorcycles for the wrong reasons, to go from bar to bar instead of to go and actually enjoy the freaking unit.
Or to look cool, alcohol, feed your pride.
Alcohol, inexperience,
too fast.
And people turning left in front of you, right?
Yeah.
They're driving too fast. They don't know how to navigate a corner, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. All right, let's get into the risks and rewards of leadership a little bit here. You've been in some high pressure roles where every decision affects thousands, more than thousands of people. What's the hardest part about leading at that level, and what's the most rewarding?
I would say the hardest part is, particularly with trade associations, is that you've got so many different people that you're trying to please, and you're trying to, thread a needle that is really a pretty small needle. And so if you're representing the OEs on one side of things, the dealers might not be happy about it. Or if you're representing the aftermarket folks, it may, conflict with some other part of the industry. And when you're, for us, we've got, manufacturers, dealers, distributors, aftermarket, all the allied trades. So that's insurance and things like that as well. So there's just so many different inputs. And so kind of understanding that, prioritizing that, and then figuring out where the common ground is and where that kind of Venn diagram overlaps each other and that sweet spot is, and then kind of charging forward with that and trying to nibble away at the other edges to the extent we can to make that Venn diagram a little bit bigger, right? And bring people into agreement on other issues. So that's probably the most challenging part of it. Most rewarding is probably seeing businesses succeed and continue to do well. When COVID hit, for example, and they shut everything down, right? I mean, they were shutting everything down. It took me about 3.5 or 4 weeks of twice a week meetings with CISA, the Center for I forget what CISA, the acronym stands for, but it's the government agency that was in charge of determining who was essential service and who was not essential service. And so they would do these twice weekly meetings and coming up with a strategy as to why should motorcycle dealerships stay open. And, there were several people in our industry who were like, we're screwed. We are going to die during COVID. It's not, our industry is going to get hammered in this. And so I immediately thought back to being up at the dealership at Bob's BMW up in Jessup, Maryland, getting my bike serviced and seeing the motorcycle cop bikes that were in there. And so I'm like, we need to be essential service. We've got motorcycle police that need to be out there working on the bikes. They need to be maintained. They need to get new bikes. You've got Park Service, BLM, Forest Service, all those guys that are using side-by-sides, ATVs. You get a natural disaster that hits, and they're the only vehicles that can get in and out of some of these places. And so we made that case based on why we should be an essential service based off of essentially public health and public need and public safety, and sent 2 letters to Chris Krebs, who was the head of CISA at the time, and finally got through on one of the calls. It was one of these things where you press a number to get in there at the beginning of the call. And if you're lucky, your call gets taken. So one day he took the call and he said, yeah, I remember seeing that letter, and I think we're going to designate you as an essential service. So the 36 or 38 states that followed the CISA guidance, we got to open up our dealerships, our manufacturing, our distribution in those states right after that, which was massive because, as we all know, during COVID, everybody wanted to get outside and do stuff, right? The recreation community took off. Motorcycle sales had that hockey stick kind of sales trajectory, and it was awesome. And we were able to stay open and do it. Yeah. So that's probably, when I think of the most satisfying, it's coming up with those strategies and then implementing it and seeing the real impact on our members.
So this is off the record, and I don't think it'll put you in the hot seat, but I want to bring up 3 things that seem to be the trending topics nowadays. Number 1, what are your thoughts on congressional term limits? Then suspending pay in shutdowns. And then the third is lobbying's impact on the free market. Go.
There's 3 little easy ones out
here.
Yeah,
just quick.
Just little.
So you can rattle them off in 2 seconds.
Yeah. So congressional term limits. I've been back and forth on this because I mentioned earlier sitting in a room with John Daigle, who had been in that position for 40 years. And he was really smart, and he could tell you, he would predict almost with uncanny accuracy how something would go politically because he'd been doing it for so long. And there was part of me that went, wow, there's a lot of value in that. There's a lot of value in having somebody who kind of is that smart on those issues. At the same time, 40 years is a long, or 40 some years is a long ass time. But Nancy Pelosi just announced that she's going to step down, and she's been in that role for 40 years now. And when you look at what they're doing with redistricting in states, how Texas went forward with redistricting to try to gerrymander so that the Republicans, wouldn't lose their majority. And then you get, okay, if you're going to do that, then California says that they're going to do it. And it's this race to the bottom is what it really is right now. Of all these states just trying to figure out how they can keep their nails on the edge of the cliff so that they don't fall off, right? They're just trying to hang on to power as much as they can. So I guess I come down on the side of term limits. You've got them every 2 years in the House, and you got them every 6 years in the Senate, right? Where there's an election. And if you don't like the way things are going, you can vote them out. So I tend to lean against a hard stop for term limits. Your second question was
suspending pay and shutdowns.
Yeah, suspending pay during shutdowns. I've been through several shutdowns while I was a federal employee, right? And there was one time where I was not considered to be an essential employee, so I was off for those however many days it was that we were shut down. All of the other times I was considered to be an essential employee, and I had to be there working. The 26-year-old kid who's working a front desk in the congressman's office, who is not considered to be an essential employee, who's living in an apartment with 3 other guys because, they just can't afford to live up here in DC, to not pay those guys for the time that they have absolutely no role in, they weren't part of the problem of getting to the point of a shutdown. I have a real problem with that. So I tend to go with that they should be paid, but I also think that members of Congress maybe shouldn't get paid during that
Thank
time.
you.
Maybe
That's
they're
what
the
I'm
ones
getting
who
at.
shouldn't get
Yes,
paid.
that's what I'm
Agreed,
getting at.
100%.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So their staff should get paid, and maybe the members shouldn't get paid
Right,
until they
right.
get a deal done,
I
and
think
then
I
they
think
would.
the whole world would agree on that one for sure.
Yeah. John Dingell had this saying of, when the level of the watering hole goes down, the animals around it look at each other a lot differently. And that's
Yes.
exactly, what I would,
Yes.
well, the scenario that I see there.
It's an amazing analogy. Yeah.
And then on the last one, kind of lobbying and the impact of lobbying. When people ask me what I do, I always say that I run government relations for the power sports industry. Well, what does that mean? And eventually you get around to, well, I'm the lobbyist for the manufacturers, dealers, distributors, aftermarket parts. And then
So I
once
wanted
you
your
throw the L
insight.
word out there, it's like
Right.
walls go up and they
Oh,
look at
boy.
you differently there too. So, we are not the power sports industry. We have a very small pack. I mean, I can probably do 5 or 6 pack events throughout a year. I don't have the money that big pharma has or that the autos have or that, these other folks have, because we just don't have people who are contributing. And most of the contributions come from our employees here at the trade association. So it has an impact, and there's no question in my mind when you look at prices of certain things like, the price of drugs, and, yes, there's a lot that goes into R&D and they need to recoup that. But, there should be a more balanced approach to people shouldn't be going bankrupt because they get breast cancer and
Right.
due to no cause of their own, right? I mean, it's genetics or
Right.
whatever else, and they're having to declare bankruptcy because medications are off the hook. The doctors are charging things that are crazy prices. And so I would like to see the impact of money in elections be lowered, but I don't know what the solution is to that, because I don't think that we should
Okay.
do public funding for elections and stuff either.
Right. Right. That's kind of what I wanted to ask you. If you had control of the whole chessboard and could move pieces wherever you wanted to, do you see any obvious fixes that could address really fairness?
Yeah, I think that there are certainly sectors out there that are making a ton of money, and they're doing it because they've got political influence, and that could be reined in. And you're seeing some of that now, and you've seen some of that in the last administration. And every time they do that, it gets into a bit of a touching the third rail type of situation where, they get lit up, and then it's like, okay, well, do I want to be able to fund it I mean, I remember when I was working for the congressman, our first campaign was a couple $100,000. You can't run a campaign for under $1 million now, right? I mean,
Right.
And I remember when we got our first campaign, that was $1 million, and it was like we had to raise $1 million for this thing. And when you got to raise that kind of money, you're going everywhere looking for it.
Right.
It's tough.
Thank you for your honest answers, man. That was cool.
Definitely. Last off the record question. Are you
He's going to
as
get you in
amazed-
trouble, man.
I'm not. Are you as amazed as we are that out of all of the people in America, we have managed to get some of the best traders in the nation into Congress? Their ROIs, their returns are just amazing. It's a crazy coincidence.
If you're going TRADER or TRAIT.
Well, you could go either way, I guess, but I was doing DER.
The T one would be an interesting conversation.
Right. Markets have been doing well. Yeah, I mean, my ROI has been pretty good recently on my 401k and stuff, but a lot of that is just because I look at where I want to put that money, and I can honestly tell you that I never, when I was on the inside, when I was working on the Hill, I never had an instance where I got somebody who came and said to me, hey, this is going to happen where the company's going to get bought out and we're going to do really well. And I didn't believe them. And thankfully I didn't believe them. I had another time where somebody came and said, I think we're going to be okay. Their stock was going in the dumps and I had money in their stock at the time. And they said, oh, no, we're going to be fine. We're going to get acquired or something else is going to happen. And I lost every penny of it. Right? So it wasn't insider trading stuff. It was more just kind of discussions that we were having. But
Hmm.
I think that the insider trading provisions that they've done, that needs to happen. I mean, members of Congress should not. I
Yes.
was, I can't tell you how many meetings I sat in the Situation Room in the White House while we were doing trade deals, for example, um, where we were discussing all kinds of stuff, right? And when I was working for the Export-Import Bank of the United States, I knew which companies were going to land a really big export deal and which ones weren't going to land the really big export deal. And there are reporting processes in place where we have to report that stuff. I mean, anytime I would buy a stock, I had to report it within a certain number of days. Annually, I had to talk about all the debts that I owned and that my wife had, and our kids, to the extent that our kids had debts. And so those reporting provisions were a pain in the butt to do, but they're really important to have, and they absolutely should be in there. And I also think that they should be strengthened as well. I never bought stock in Boeing or GE or Honeywell or, any of the companies that we were doing deals with when I was at the Export-Import Bank, because I was just like, there's no way in how, A, I don't want it'd be unethical, and B, I don't want to have to deal with any of the reporting or any of the microscopic
Right.
analysis that would be done by the Hills if they
Right.
found out that I had bought that stuff. So
For sure.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks for answering all that.
Yeah, that was great.
The last observation that I just enjoy looking at is there's a handful of people. It started about 5 or 6 years ago where they started creating bots that will track certain people like Pelosi or you name it in Congress. They'll track their trades and follow their trades. And these guys are ending the year with like a 200% return. It's amazing.
It was that Chinese kid that created that app, right? That's
There's
kind of like hitting
one.
it. That he
There's
followed
one. There's Quiver.
Pelosi's lead, and he
A
made a
bunch of
ton of
them
money,
have,
man.
yeah.
And now
Yeah.
he's letting everybody else follow Pelosi's lead.
Yeah.
That's so
Yeah.
funny.
There's Quiver. Quantitative is another one. Anyway, thanks for humoring us. That's really fascinating insight. I appreciate you answering all that. Back to regularly scheduled programming. So getting into the future and the next generation, looking ahead, what excites you most about where the power sports industry is going and what keeps you up at night?
Excited about like the different products that are coming out. And, we've got our AIM Expo trade show that we do every year in January. It's going to be the 7th through the 9th this year out in Anaheim, right in conjunction with A1. So, you get done with our trade show and then you go to A1, which is just a great kickoff to the Supercross series. But I love seeing all the new stuff that's coming out, the different companies that are innovating and changing and upgrading the way that they're doing stuff. The things that keep me up at night tend to be more along the lines of what's the next government regulation that's going to come down on us, right? We had some rulemaking that was out there with the Consumer Product Safety Commission with regard to side-by-sides and debris penetration of, logs coming up through the floor of a side-by-side.
Wow.
And we went through and we revised our standards, and we revised the design standards for that, and came up with a new system that we tested, and it proved to be effective. But the Consumer Product Safety Commission still had this rulemaking regulation that was hanging over our heads at the time. And, we're like, guys, what more do we have to do? We've changed this. They were in the room during these discussions on our redesign standard of our standards and stuff. And thankfully, this administration, they did terminate that rulemaking recently, which was great. But, something like that, if they decided, it got all the way up to where they could have just had a vote and said, yep, we're going to implement this. And that would have meant the shutdown of all side-by-side manufacturing for at least a year, probably closer to 2 years, as they redesigned the vehicles, as they resourced stuff, as they retested things. There was one company in the entire country that did that testing, and even they admitted that it wasn't intended to be an efficacy type of test. It was just meant to be an initial test of how they could penetrate our floorboards. So, that was a huge, huge win for us this year, and I appreciate that. I appreciate, Chairman Feldman at the Consumer Product Safety Commission actually being a stand-up guy and doing the right thing, because he realized that we had already addressed this and the rulemaking was no longer necessary. But when you get something like that that could shut down your industry for a year or more, that scares the hell out of me.
And
Yeah.
especially now, right? Because the ATV, UTV, the side by side market is the best selling power sports market anyway, isn't it?
Side by sides are the best selling and fastest growing segment. ATVs are down a bit. Motorcycles are down this year.
But side by
Um,
sides, wow,
but
that
side by sides
that
are
would have really hurt the industry, man, if that would have passed through. So good job on that as far as everything.
it-
Let me ask you a
Thanks.
question. If you could give one piece of advice to the next generation of industry leaders coming up who do want to make a difference, but kind of don't know where to start, how to start, what would you tell them?
I would tell them to be open to what the next generation of vehicles is going to look like. We had in the last administration where they were kind of, and in some states where they're mandating electric vehicles on us versus organically letting the kind of, the market decide on what should come out. I certainly see that there's going to be an evolution in our vehicles, whether that ends up being electric or it's hydrogen. I mean, hydrogen, arguably, there's almost as much need for infrastructure for hydrogen as there is for electric because you can't go out to a trail and get there's most trailheads don't have charging
Right.
infrastructure. They don't have a hydrogen infrastructure. You break down or you run out of gas somewhere out on a trail, they can bring you a can of gas. They can't bring you a can of electricity or
That's
a can
right.
of so but to look at what are the upcoming possibilities that are in the industry and try to keep your mind open to those new technologies and how those might work out. And AI is going to be a big part of that. I mean, my daughter does a lot with AI, my oldest daughter. And
What does she do?
she was pretty skeptical about it at first. She's a product manager for a company called Qualtrics, and they do a lot with customer service stuff. They do a lot with other issues, but she is a really, really smart kid who graduated from University of Virginia and does great things. But she was skeptical about AI at first, and she was kind of worried about what the impacts of AI might be on the. In her case, it was they were using some of that stuff for the way that customer service people responded to your questions or your inquiries, um, and I think she's gotten past that and she's kind of understood that AI is going to be there no matter what. And
That's
so
right.
it's just a
Right.
matter of figuring out how do you use AI for good versus for evil, and how do
Right.
you, kind of put the guardrails up along those lines and stuff. And so anybody who's coming up in the industry, I would say, try to look through that curve and see what's coming up versus, focusing on the road in front of you, because we all know how that ends up for us.
100%.
Right.
Great advice.
Great advice. All right, man. In closing, Scott, you've spent a career being the calm in the chaos, the voice in the room that stands up for our world when others can't. For everyone listening, dealers, riders, manufacturers, what do you want them to understand about what you and your team are fighting for every single day?
Yeah, I want them to know that our team is passionate about power sports. I mean, we love the industry. We do everything that we can to protect and defend and grow the industry, to raise our awareness on the Hill and with state legislatures. Um, and we'll continue to do that. It's not easy. We need your help. I will tell you that. I talked a little bit about the economic impact that we have in every congressional district. And if every dealer met with their member of Congress, whether they agree with him or her or not, but just had them out to their facility, showed them their facility, showed them what it is that they do, the jobs that are supported there, the work that is done, they would have a better understanding of the power sports industry. And then when we go in to meet with them on Capitol Hill or in the state legislature, it's going to be a lot easier for us because they're going to have some sort of a base knowledge, right? I mean, we've got the motorcycle caucus folks who kind of understand motorcycles and they're passionate about them. But for everybody else, they need to see what good we're doing and the jobs that we're supporting and the money that we're generating for the local community. And they see that sometimes through the charity fundraisers that you guys might support or the various events, where you've got some signage up, but it's not anywhere near the same as bringing them out to your facility and seeing that manufacturing floor or that dealership or that distribution site where you're doing so much good.
Scott, I wanted to
Yes.
ask you too what Ben just said. You had mentioned by getting your community leaders to come to the businesses from your experiences. You've been in the seat for a while now. You've talked to a lot of small businesses, large businesses in our industry. Are they pretty open to doing this type of stuff, or is it reluctant? Do you have to kind of try to get them out? Like, how does it work? Because I'm sure some dealers that are listening to the podcast may say like, well, my beliefs are opposite of what our congresswoman or congressman are. So do I want to get them into my shop or not? That we have this separation, right? Because when everybody believes. And so what's your experience to tell these guys and gals listening as far as that?
The thing to do is to not have them come in, right? The harder thing might be to have them come in and to establish a relationship with somebody that you disagree with. But I find that even when you have somebody that you disagree with, when they come in, they might come in and go, oh, well, motorcycles are dangerous or something. And as you're showing them around, they get a better education. They understand that, oh, well, MSF courses are out there and they can take an MSF course. And, the woman who's the head of the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, when she got appointed the head of NTSB, went out and took an MSF course down in Fredericksburg, Maryland, Virginia, rather. And she changed it. It changed her approach, right? She understood that. And she's like, you guys really do focus on safety. I couldn't believe it. Every time we were out on the range, they were preaching about safety and doing this and that. And then she had a better understanding so that she doesn't come into it and just think of, red pavement or something like that as when they're out there doing an investigation of the latest crash. And so it's difficult, but that's why we, the MIC, SBIA, and ROVA, we hold an annual fly-in out here where people come out and they lobby their members of Congress. And when they do that, we had one guy who has an aftermarket exhaust company, Reinhardt Racing, and Jed was up here with this, Jed Holyfield, and he was up and went in and met with Mark Meadows, who was his local congressman where they had their facility. Well, 6 months later, Mark Meadows becomes the White House chief of staff in the first Trump administration. And now you've got somebody who has got the White House chief of staff who has been to your facility, understands the manufacturing that you're doing. In his case, it's all American steel, all American aluminum, American employees. They're making kick-ass, awesome sounding exhausts. And you've got the president's chief of staff who knows that, right?
That's killer.
And when you look at the state reps, those guys are all the farm team. They all want to come out to DC at some point, right? So
that's right.
Get them in there, show them, start that education process. And then when they're out here, it makes our job a little easier.
Amazing, man. Yeah. Amazing. Where can people follow along? Where can people contribute? How can people get involved?
Yeah. So mic.org is the MIC website, svia.org. And our ROVA, ROHVA.org is the side-by-side one. And then MSF-USA.org is the MSF site. They can contact us at MICGR, which stands for MIC Government Relations, but MICGR.org if you want to email us about something that's coming up. If you've got issues where you're paying, exorbitantly high tariffs right now, or you've got, you're at risk of losing a shop because of what's going on in the economy or any of that kind of stuff, let us know that, because then that's information that we can use when we're going up and meeting with elected officials on a regular basis. And that information is really important. I had somebody reach out to me from NPA talking about that they needed a replacement key for one of the motorcycles that they had purchased from a dealership. That Harley key, which had cost them $8 before, is now costing them $80 some, right? $84, I think it was. Because they couldn't just determine where that aluminum was smelted and poured or cast or whatever the case was. And so they were getting a 200% tariff on that key. And then you got to go to the poor customer too. And they're going to say, what the hell are you charging? This thing is, why are you charging me $80 for an $8 key?
So, that's amazing, man. I know you got a lot on your plate, so we're going to try to cut the show. But I just want to say, man, thank you so much for taking the time. This has been so educational, not only for us, but I hope for our listeners too. And guys, if anybody with a business in our industry, you can contact the Motorcycle Industry Council. They'll be able to guide you guys in any way possible to help you get to your local governor or senator, whatever it is, to help out. So take advantage of that. We work better when we're all together, regardless of what the media tries to portray with us. Get that person out, whether you agree with them or whether you don't. Let them see your facility. Let them meet your employees. And I think that's what Scott was saying. Things turn, and you might get that help that you need when it's needed. Thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts. Keep up the fight, man. You're our gladiator out there. We're totally proud of you and totally stoked to have got a chance to just sit down with you about realities of our industry and what's going on.
Yeah, really appreciate the opportunity. Appreciate what you guys are doing with the podcast, with the website, and everything else, and your involvement that you've got in other organizations. Like you said, we all, the rising tide lifts all boats, and when we're in this all together, we can accomplish great things. So thank you.
All right. Appreciate you.
Definitely.
Have a great rest
so
of your
much,
week.
Scott. This is awesome.
Yeah.
You too.
Hey, we'll see you when you come to Jensen too.
You bet.
Right.
Cold beers on us.
There we go.
All right, cool.
I'm going to hold you to it.
Thanks,
I'm going to
Scott.
hold you to it.
We're in,
Done.
man. We're in.